Hey, all you crazy sci-fi fans. Time for your daily dose of insanity. Over here at the Sci-Fi Shenanigans Podcast with your hosts, J.R. Handley and me, Chris Winder. Just two nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions. A place where the sky's the limit, space is the place, and nerds run the world. Without further ado.
All right, geez, Chris, shut up. Quit taking the show already. So today we decided to do something a little different. We'd mentioned we were going to do some book reviews, and today we brought in a guest and literati, Paul E. Cooley, another author, and we are going to review Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, the novel, not the movie. It's a classic piece of military science fiction written in 1959, and it was groundbreaking in many ways, and we'll be talking about those today. So Paul... we invited you to do this novel with us because your literary background, you got all educated in book learning and stuff in it.
So book learning? Book learning. We don't do book learning.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
I am the author of The Parsec award-winning The Black series. And the Derelict Saga, which mixes military, sci-fi, space opera, horror, all the good stuff all together. And wrapping up that third book, I've been podcasting all my stories for free for, 9 years now. And you can go check out my stuff, iTunes, etc., all over the place.
And
awesome.
Like always, we will have those links for you in the show notes of this episode. So just as a brief summary, and I swear Chris is really there. He even sometimes talks, but we'll get him there. But we're going to give a brief summary of the novel. We'll talk about the characters and their development, the plot, the world building and description, and then some major themes. And then we'll conclude with talking about our overall thoughts on the novel. So do you want to do the summary there, Chris, so they believe me when I say you're a real boy?
I'm a real boy. Actually, something I'd like to mention before reading the notes for the prep for the show, I had no idea that this was written in 1959. I thought it was much more recent. The story blew my mind, and I had to go verify it. I thought you were wrong.
No, it was groundbreaking in more ways than that. I think he was one of the first science fiction authors to involve to give women the role that he did in combat. And then he's also was one of the first ones to do minority characters as the main character. If Juan Johnny Rico was Filipino,
that blows my mind. I had no idea. I am an uncultured swine.
No, just not very well read.
Oh yeah, and that too.
All right, so why don't we jump right to the summary?
Where's the summary? Oh, there's the summary. Okay. In Robert A. Heinlein's controversial bestseller, a recruit of the future goes through the toughest boot camp in the universe and into battle against mankind's most alarming enemy. Join the army and see the universe. The historians can't seem to settle whether to call this one the Third Space War or the Fourth, or whether the First Interstellar War fits it better. The soldiers just call it the Bug War. Everything up to then and still later were incidents, patrols, or quote-unquote police actions. In the mobile infantry, everybody fights, but you're just as dead if you buy the farm in an incident as you are if you buy it in a declared war.
So what do you guys, you think that summary pretty much fits the book well? Did they nail that one when they wrote the ad copy?
I guess. I think it's so much more than that, though.
Yeah, I agree. It's the typical back cover copy, which barely touches or breaks the surface of what the book is really about. That's kind of the most cases.
I also noticed that the back copy in older books is a little bit different than the way we would do it, I think, today. If you compare them side by side, I can't put my finger on how it's different. It just feels different when you look at older back copy and the newer stuff.
Well, look at this. They don't say the character's name. There's nothing personal about him in here at all.
Oh, you're right.
It is all very much it is all about the universe. It is about the story that you're going to encounter. It has nothing to do with anything personal at all.
It's a lot more cerebral.
Yes. And you'll notice it doesn't even mention anything that happened on Earth. It doesn't mention that it just doesn't mention any of that. It just says basically Oh yeah, well, there was this war that happened. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, but the war is only
So it doesn't really give much away at all.
it's only a piece of the book. It's not even. It's like saying Full Metal Jacket is all about boot camp.
No,
You mean it's not?
The boot camp scene was important, but it's not the whole thing.
That is correct. It is and in fact, if you compare this book to Full Metal Jacket, actually you shouldn't do that. Compare this book to The Short Timers. There we go. That's the book. The Full Metal Jacket is based on, and there are a lot of similarities between this book and that one.
Interesting. Okay. I didn't know that. I've bought the book. It's on my growing to be read list. Short Timers,
it's a quick read, and it's definitely worth it. And however bad you thought the movie was, as far as what they did to those guys in Vietnam, it's worse.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I enjoyed the movie, the boot camp scenes and stuff. So
most of that is ripped directly from the book, but the book gets a little more involved.
All right. Making a note to look it up.
Not for my 12-year-old to read.
No, Gustav Hosford's The Short Timers is a fantastic book.
Okay.
I know I read, good. Tim O'Brien did a lot of
The Things They
books
Carried.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, let's move into talking about. Yes, segue. We'll get better at this, I promise everybody. But so the characters in this book, the main character was basically Juan Johnny Rico, who was a mobile infantry soldier who we follow through his career progressions. So since you're the guest, Paul, you want to tell us what you thought about the main character?
He is a prop. For all intents and purposes, he is a prop. He is simply someone there to go through Heinlein's universe.
Oh, he is the universe exposition device.
Yeah, he basically, because he has, and in fact, when he first signs up for government service, it's pretty obvious when that whole deal goes down that he has no idea what he wants to do with his life. He is the idle rich.
Right.
And I think that's part of this. The guy has really no identity. He has no attachment to anything, which is one of the reasons why I think he's so successful in what he does in the book, because he's not weighed down by any kind of personal relationships or any ties. I mean, he's almost completely divorced from the people and the lives that are going on around him. And I don't know if that was Heinlein's purpose, but that's how I read it. Is that this is the second time I've read it, but it's been 30 years. But the bottom line is that he doesn't really have much connection to anything human.
It's true. Yeah. Feeling him out of his comfort zone is not a difficult thing to do. That may have just been to make the story easier to tell.
Maybe, but even when he talks about girls, not being able to, he likes them. He's heterosexual, but he doesn't know how to talk to them. He doesn't know how to relate to them. And this is somebody who went to a high school with a lot of different people, and one of his friends was a woman. So it's got all these differing, seemingly dichotomous statements coming out. And the funny thing is, you were dealing with a first person narrator, so there's no telling how many lies he's telling while he's telling the story.
Right.
True.
That makes some of it suspect. Do what?
Or wait, he's just getting wrong because it's his point of view. It's his opinion. Maybe not outright lying.
Right. And the thing is, he just doesn't want to talk about it, which actually fits his personality in other parts of the book, where he decides that he just doesn't want to, discuss what he brought up.
Right.
So I kind of agreed with you, Paul, about the sort of more of a prop device, because I sort of didn't see a whole lot of character development with him. I mean, we see career progression, but that's not the same thing as personal growth. We see him parroting his high school morality and philosophy, I think was the name of the class, the teacher, a lot.
Yes.
I do, like we mentioned in the intro, that it was significant that, we find out that he's a minority character, and, for when it was written, that would have been groundbreaking. Especially given that Heinlein, was in the Navy in the 50s. And so, the Filipino sailors back then would have, a lot of them, unfortunately, would have just been like the mess cranks or, the stewards, serving the officers in the wardroom.
Yep.
And so for him to take that personal experience and say one of them could have been the hero, I mean, that alone was significant, I think. But as far as Juan Rico himself, it's like, anybody could have slotted in that story and nothing would have really changed, I don't think. An interesting historical footnote, but I don't know. Juan just wasn't doing it for me.
Well, I
Phrasing.
I said nothing. I don't think that, like I said, I don't think that was the point. I think the point was maybe Heinlein was making a point about people who don't know where they fit in the world and that they often end up joining the military. And
yeah, I can see that.
Could definitely say that is still the case because it fits for 3 of my friends that joined the military.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably why I joined.
There you go.
I joined because I was a military brat from a long line of them, and not joining would have made me the rebel. So seriously, in my family, it's sort of like not is he going to be a doctor or a lawyer? It's what color camouflage is he going to be wearing? So it's true though. I mean, they've literally got pictures of me as a baby wearing camouflage diaper. So so what did you think of old Juan there, Chris?
I liked him as a character, but I thought at least early on he was pretty weak-minded. You see a lot of that still today. He was a blank slate that just kind of absorbed everything around him. So when his teacher spoke, he took his moral philosophy and the moral philosophy of everything that he could pick and choose from and basically started worshiping it like a religion. He just kept absorbing and absorbing it, and I didn't see a lot of internal conflict. But I guess maybe someone in that situation in a future where you're at war with possibly the universe, maybe that's believable. I really liked him as a character. I just wish he would make up his mind and man up.
I don't think he knows how.
Yeah, that's the problem.
And this could have been just a feature of when the novel was written. But like in the intro, they start with him on a mission and he's on the bounce in his trooper armor. And it's just, they're fighting the bad guys. He's killing them. It's like, just another day.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's losing his own, mobile infantry guys. And it's like, you could have just shot a target and, you'd never know he just lost one of his, brothers in arms. It was almost like he didn't care. And that sort of struck me that there was the lack of emotion and connection to his own unit.
I think we saw the connection to his unit when they weren't on the firing line, when they weren't on the bounce. Because it seemed like when he had moments to himself, he was very philosophic about that and did not like the idea of losing his people. But while what they've shown us throughout the book is that the longer and the more experienced the longer he's in and the more experienced he gets with all the problems of having what by the end of the book, he's on his third company.
Yes.
If you think about it.
The first two were wiped.
Yeah.
And the first two were completely wiped out. So, I mean, that the guy has got to have serious reservations about making connections with most folks. But I think it's pretty clear by the end of the book, considering they renamed the outfit after him, that he had a profound effect on the troopers under his command.
I can see that. I mean, you're all right that the scene that they start with is actually him in his later unit, and then it jumps back in time to when he joined. And so in that respect, yes, you do see some precipitating reasons for him to be as detached, but it struck me as an odd place to start the book.
Okay.
But we'll transition into the overall plot of the novel. So Paul, what were your thoughts on that?
It's when you said it's like a day in the life, how it starts out.
Right.
This is basically what he's doing. He's giving us an entire biography, and very dry at times, about how he got to where he is and everything that happened along the way. He never discusses politics. He, really in depth. He doesn't discuss a lot of those things that go on. And so the plot is just basically Heinlein's doing what he can to drag you in before he begins to work on the boot camp stuff and everything else. The plot is basically just here's 5 or 7 years of my life.
Yeah,
that's really what it comes down to. All the action is contained from his point of view. I can't remember how many pages are in boot camp. Was it like 40 or 50?
It was a large chunk of it was just the training montage.
Yeah, I think that was it was something like that. It may have been even longer, but during that period, we got to find out a lot more about what government service means.
Right.
And we got to know, and we got to learn about how all that stuff works. So I thought the way he used the plot devices to get there and get that to us without saying, as you know, Bob, is see that episode of DRS. I think the exposition works really well in this case because of the way it's been done. And the entire plot is like that. We're basically trying to figure out how he got to where he is. And at the beginning of the book, he doesn't even tell us what he is, besides being a trooper.
Right. Yeah.
We don't know that he's actually in charge of a company.
Was it a company or a platoon? I think it's a platoon because I think he's a lieutenant at the end.
Yeah, lieutenant. Sorry, my military jargon's not up to snuff. But
well,
yeah, platoon.
They were a little bit odd in how they did things because Heinlein sort of combined some stuff when he created the mobile infantry and then the fleet or the Navy, and so it's definitely interesting mesh of all of that. I was surprised because my first experience with Heinlein's Starship Troopers was the movie I remember watching when it first came out. Mm-hmm. So I sort of expected the novel to be very action-packed after watching the movie, and it definitely wasn't. It lacked in the action, I think. I mean, there were some interspersed, but it was definitely more, a philosophical treatise of a dystopian future than it really was an action novel. I mean, it was good for what it was, but it definitely was not what I had expected. Many of the ideas, I think, from the plot were new to me. I mean, even today. But as far as an overall story arc for a plot, other than just the day in the life, I don't know. I don't know that I could have them pin it down more than that.
It's not really that difficult to describe. I mean, it just and for 59 or whatever, a lot of literature is written like this.
Okay.
And that's what I found really interesting about this book compared to some of the other pulp books that were coming out of the time is that he was interested in exploring the philosophy, the morals, the mores, the taboos of that society or that version of humanity. And I just thought this was all just a convenient device to get that across.
I was definitely taken aback. You've listened to the news at all, and we're not going to go straight into the politics, but if you listen to the news at all, you constantly hear the next generation is garbage. We're all doomed. The millennials this, and soon it'll be whatever's after the millennials. And you think that's kind of new. And then you listen to him bemoaning the youth in that scene where he talks about these kids running around amok, and it's not the kids' fault that their parents didn't discipline them, and it was this lack of corporal punishment and the rise of psychology that doomed everybody. You're looking back at it, and I just picture an old man in his boxers and wife beater shaking his fist on his lawn, like right. You kids. And so
that's exactly how his who was it that was going through all that?
It was him because he was reciting what his moral philosophy teacher had taught him.
Yes, that guy. Yeah, the colonel. Yeah, so basically that stuff stuck in his craw, and it wasn't until after he graduates from boot camp that he takes a look around and goes, the world is completely different now. The way I see it, the way everything that I absorb, I'm processing it all differently now.
I mean, getting whipped will do that to you. taking the lash, I'm telling you.
I survived.
I mean, we send all you kids to boot camp at age 10 and we'll fix this country. Yeah.
I messed up some in boot camp too, but the worst we had to do was push-ups and run in circles. I mean, nobody took a whip to us.
Well, that's why you weren't in the mobile infantry, boy.
Nope, I was just light infantry. I wasn't smart enough for them jumping doodads.
Oh,
So Chris, what did you think of the plot overall?
I'm getting plot and theme mixed up a little bit, but I think the whole point of the book, the way it felt to me, it felt like a prequel. Like this whole book is going to be designed to build this universe and get it ready for the next dozen books that come out. I think it's a combination.
Got that vibe.
Yeah, I got a little bit of that, and I got a little bit of what if as well. I like what if books, like the movie The Matrix. Okay, what if we really are just brains in a vat somewhere, and we're being fed all this information? I like the idea of what if officers have to be enlisted first. What would our world look like if all of a sudden these rules that he set up start actually taking place? How would people react to that? And how would the world change? Only citizens willing to risk everything get the right to vote. Wow, that would change a lot of things. So just the whole philosophical part, I really, really enjoyed that. I'm just really disappointed that there's not a Starship Troopers 2 and 3. And
well, there are the movies.
No, those are the films.
No.
Yeah, if you like Casper Van Dien, that's his entire career.
I'd want the books. The films didn't do justice to the book.
So
no, they're completely different.
So what
things.
you had said about the what would happen if you had the officers had to have been enlisted first, and I'm thinking, you were a sergeant, Chris, in the Marine Corps. I was a sergeant in the Army. Paul tortures them on the written page, the sergeants, I mean. So it's definitely something, you've heard sitting around the NCO club. It's like, oh, if that dumb lieutenant. So,
and we actually had when I was teaching at the Communication Electronics School, we had a captain who was a former sergeant, and the nickname, at least in the Marines, for that is a Mustang.
Army too. So, it's an older term, but I mean,
yeah. And I'll tell you, once as we started appearing in the unit, because everybody rotates out, but as everybody comes in, of course, he would be the first person we saw, standing in our alphas and handing our orders, Sergeant Winder reporting as ordered. We walked out. Usually there's a staff sergeant or a gunnery sergeant there, and he'd say, "Let me tell you about this captain. He was a sergeant too. He is not going to screw with you. He knows what it's like being a sergeant." I would have followed that guy into any battle. If he would have told me to do anything, I would have done it without question, because at least that guy I could trust had been in my shoes and had proven that he actually had a brain. I didn't trust all my officers. In fact, I didn't trust any of them for various reasons. But had they been enlisted before, I would have just thought them superstars.
But see, there's a danger in that, because if everybody starts that way, there's a reason there's the lane that is what the sergeants do, and then it is what the lieutenants and the captains, et cetera, do. And a lot of times that's the danger with the Mustang officers is sometimes they forget, you're not a sergeant anymore. You're an officer. Go do officer things and let the sergeants do the sergeant thing. So, and I was a little bit disappointed when Heinlein didn't address that potential flaw with that system where everybody has to rise through the ranks that way, because it definitely happens. He had to have seen it during his time. I mean, if he was an officer in the 50s, he would have served with officers that had started enlisted, World War II, Korea.
Sure.
So, I mean, he has to have seen the downside.
I never saw it because we only had that one officer that I'm aware of who was a Mustang, and they're pretty rare. At least in the Marines. Just where it's Chief Warrant Officer 5s. I saw one of those as well.
That's because warrant officers are good at shamming.
Oh, man.
They hide somewhere with their coffee. They stick it in their veins, and then they're out. Yeah. At least that's the way it was in the Army. I mean, we had a maintenance warrant officer. I swear. I mean, he was on the TO&E, the table of organization and equipment, your chain of command. And I saw his picture, when we were learning it, when we got to the unit. But I don't think I ever saw him other than the day he handed me the keys to my gun truck and said, "Don't F this up, son, or it's coming out of your paycheck."
Right.
And that was literally That was literally the only thing he said to me was, "Don't F this up, son, or it's coming out of your paycheck."
It's like stumbling across a unicorn. It could happen.
Right.
It's going to be pretty uncommon. But yeah, but
so did you?
But back to the point. If I saw this world get built in front of me where this was a requirement, and I absolutely loved it. The character was the one who introduced it, so I love the character for doing it, and of course, I love the author for creating the character who made this happen. And I know that's my own bias, but I really liked it for that.
So, Paul, as the outsider looking in, I don't believe you served in the military, correct? Like you went the more traditional civilian route?
Oh, okay. You broke up on me. What?
I said, so you were never in the military, correct? So as the outsider looking in, you got an opinion on this one? Because you write about military convincingly, so.
The closest I got to the military is I was in the Texas A&M ROTC for more than a semester. I had to drop out because of health issues, but it was boot camp, sort of, kind of. Anyway, I think that just to make it clear, citizenship, you didn't have to join the military. You had to join a government job, but they told you what job you were going to take.
Right.
Correct.
In his case, he wasn't good for anything but military service.
They offered him dog handler.
Right.
Say again?
But those
they did
those
offer
are
him
weird dogs.
dog handler.
Oh, yeah. Wait, but it was still military.
Oh, that's right. I thought
that's
for some reason I was thinking them as more like a police sort of arm, but you're right. Technically, they were army.
Yeah, because they used the dogs to, what are they called, neo dogs?
Yeah.
Yes, neo dogs.
And they were
neo
like,
dogs.
I don't know, half people, half dogs, and psychic.
Well, they were dogs that could talk in their own little language, but they were more or less linked with their handler. They were supposed to use them to basically bring the bugs up from the hole.
Oh,
it was
scary.
definitely an interesting. I wanted them to expand on that because that seemed very, very interesting to me.
I wanted an entire book on that. I would love to see a handler go through all that training and everything else and then get completely and totally crushed when little puppy dog dies.
Yeah, that's one of the things they said that because the major that was doing his career counseling before he went off to MI school had said that he had been a handler, and when his dog died, like he broke mentally and they had to lock him up in an insane asylum for a while, basically, because the bond was so strong.
Yeah, and if the person dies first, they shoot the dog just out of mercy.
Yeah, that was the other part of it that I found really interesting, is that it was basically a symbiotic relationship on both sides.
Yeah,
I did. I thought that was fascinating. I would hoped for more, and that was one of the things they never put in the movies, and I don't know why, because that's certainly cool. And they had the tech to do it in the 90s when they made the movie. Like they certainly could
remember the first contact they had with the bugs, they all killed themselves.
True, but the dogs would have existed in the world, so they could have shown some of that.
Yes, they could have.
And that was cool. I mean, I get why they didn't do the suits in the movie, cost, but the dogs, I mean, it's not like we don't have real ones. They could have grabbed and, but we'll, before we jump into the world building and description, let's take a second for a word from our sponsor.
When a strange symbol is found at a burned down historical site, Houston arson investigator Emmy Aninzo goes to work. As mysterious and inexplicably hot fires break out across the drought-ravaged city, she finds herself digging through the ashes of history. It's a race against time to track down the serial arsonist and explain the seemingly impossible heat of the fires. As strange evidence begins to pile up, Emmy wonders if the arsonist is insane, or even worse, possessed. Can Emmy and her colleagues find and stop him before the entire city burns? Parsec award-winning author Paul E. Cooley wraps ancient mythology around an eerie contemporary tale that will leave you burning for more. Garrus Inferno, a free podcast novel available from shadowpublications.com and iTunes. Some mysteries shouldn't be solved.
All right. Thank you. So for the world building and description, what were your thoughts on it, Paul? We're going to keep letting you go first since you're the guest, and we want to pretend we have the manners. Notice I said pretend. You should hear Chris and I talking to ourselves.
I have 3 manners.
You've obviously never been on DRS. I think the world building was, and like I mentioned, all this was done so that we didn't have to do the, as you know, Bob, or, the standard cliche ways of getting across the world. And because he's really the only character we have contact with.
Yeah.
That made it a little bit easier because he never had to explain anything to anybody. And that's one of the reasons why Heinlein probably wrote the book this way, is so that we could get it all from the character as he's remembering as he discovered it, if that makes any sense.
It does.
So the world building, from the very first page, you are basically thrown into a cataclysm of crazy, because he's talking about bouncing. We don't understand what bounce is until probably 3 or 4 pages in, and not because he tells us, but because we figure it out.
Yeah.
That it's a phrase. And we get the meaning. And that's pretty much how all the world building works in here, is that we get very little description, and then we see how something is used later on. Like he describes the suit sort of, and then later on, a few more chapters away, we'll find out how he controls the suit. The entire the lieutenant colonel who was his history and morals teacher, was it history and morals?
I think history and moral philosophy. I think it was.
Okay. That teacher is there as, again, another foil to basically get around the as you know, Bob. It's to basically give you an idea of what the folks who came from government service think about the rest of humanity. It's not just that lieutenant colonel. From what Heinlein puts in this book, it seems to me like the entire society is split between two people: those who have the love of money, and those who are basically really participating, contributing to the society.
Right.
Is basically what it seemed like to me. That because everybody he knew that whose parents weren't in government service were all wealthy.
Yeah.
If you go back and look.
His dad was a well-to-do business person. Because I remember when in the beginning, when he joins the MI, his dad's we'll send you on basically the tour of the world if you just don't do this stupid army stuff. So
yeah, basically. So they've got money. I wasn't sure if Heinlein was trying to say that everybody who wasn't in government service was rich, at least where he was, but that did strike me. And it kind of follows along, because I think if you go back and you look at some of the other instances where he does run across, non-military government folks, which is very rare in this book, you get the idea that they understand each other, that they appreciate his contribution more than the civvies do, or the non-citizens, I should say. So I found that kind of interesting, and all of that just builds. I mean, so much of the world building has nothing to do with science fiction. It has everything to do with how the society is constructed.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but he does work on that. We know that they've traveled to other planets. We know they have these spacecraft that can do badass things. We know they have these suits, which are amazing. We get all of that through his eyes as he is, going through it and, basically living it. And so the world building is all this, it's just all boiled in, and he doesn't, the only thing that I found that he really pointed at, and he seemed to be peering around the curtain at us, was when somebody was giving their philosophy.
Yeah. So
that was very, very different from non-citizens.
Right.
Yeah, I would say the other part of that is the description. And I mean, some of his descriptions even hold up today, as far as the quality of the prose, and like the suits he was describing when he did describe the mobile infantry armor, like the I don't know, it didn't strike me as that different than what we read in modern science fiction.
Yeah,
no,
I
not
think
really.
I think a lot of authors copy versus steal. I think a lot of authors model their own battle armor, which is it's a thing that's been around since probably the 1920s. Just the idea of being able to jump into a robot and go for it. But I think they model their stuff after this book, and now it's just become so commonplace, people forget where it came from.
I think that happens more often than not when you go back and look at historical science fiction.
Well, the other thing is that sometimes, maybe it's because Heinlein's book did, but sometimes, you find out that the speculative part of speculative fiction, that they got it right. And so that's why it sticks out, because what he described isn't that different than some of the modern mech suits that they're working on, even today.
That they give to 3-year-olds.
It's fully enclosed.
So, and it was Colonel or Mr. Dubois, and it was the history and moral philosophy class.
Yeah,
so,
that guy.
Google is my friend.
The lieutenant colonel, I think.
Yeah, he was a lieutenant colonel, and he was the history and moral philosophy teacher. So I would say that the description, I was really impressed, aside from what he got right, just the quality of his writing. I mean, it was very poetic, I thought.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think that's one of the joys of going back and reading a classic book, is if it's withstood this test of time and is still that popular, then there's a few things there that we can learn as both as writers and as readers, just enjoy the hell out of it.
Absolutely. I know a lot of the military academies even assign it as reading for the learning value of what, stuff that is in there. It's been compared to Sun Tzu's The Art of War. I think that's going a little bit too far, but
yeah,
it is there.
Well, there are actually several things that he steals from The Art of War, but doesn't attribute to it.
Some of what is The Art of War was just, the colloquial, common sense. Some of it is there. It's, he might have recorded it, but it wasn't anything that you couldn't get from von Clausewitz's, was it, Blood and Iron? Is that it? My mind just went blank. But yeah, it was entertaining. It was definitely thought-provoking. I don't know that I would put it into the that high of a realm, is all I'm saying.
Wow.
So
he's going to poo-poo the awesome novel that it is. Shame.
I saw his rating. He's already poo-pooed it.
What's up with that?
So since you've already implied that you thought it was awesome, Chris, why don't you tell us what you thought about the world building and description?
I was absolutely enthralled. I really didn't care that the action scenes were missing. I was surprised, but it didn't bother me at all. I loved how he put everything together, how he described it. I recognized that in the school scene, that was exposition, but it was absolutely believable. It didn't seem contrived that you would have these students and you would have the teacher, and the teacher would be teaching the student things that the student didn't know, and therefore the reader didn't know, and filling in all these gaps. It wasn't until afterwards that I thought about it, and I said, wow, that was him filling in the gaps for us in what felt like a very natural way. I'm not sure had I written this story, I'm not sure I would have done it the same way. But I also would have written story number 2 because this was a perfect setup for it. But just I was able to feel the stress and the anxiety and even the stress and anxiety of the father and his son going off to go join this thing that he just absolutely does not believe in and doesn't even see a use for it. So what if you want to participate? That's not important. Here's what's important. Here's what we've been doing. Here's why we're successful. I loved seeing that conflict and I loved some of the bug fights, even though they weren't that intense. I just love the whole strategy behind the story. So yeah, we're on different sides of the spectrum here.
So just a quick Google reference to get it, so I could correct the record. It's Karl von Clausewitz, and my German, I'm probably butchering it. It was a Prussian general, but he wrote On War. It wasn't Blood and Iron.
Okay.
But I don't know. It was a hard one for me to judge, partly as far as the world building, because I saw the movie first, and so in my head, when I do that, you're picturing the characters as the movie. Mm-hmm. It's hard not to. I understood definitely the world Heinlein was creating. I could see the distinctions between what was the book and what was the movie. Certainly the fact that Dizzy was a female in the movie was hugely different, and had that relationship been there in the book, it would have been an entirely different book. And I don't know how that would have flown in 1959. And it's definitely, you can learn from the way he did the world building and the tricks he used to get around the, as you know, Bob, and the description, certainly, how he wrote just enough so he could say what he was saying without oversaying it to let your mind fill in. And I think that's the beauty of what he did, is he left just enough for you to, to frame the house, and then he let you decorate the walls.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of, and so because he did it that way, you can kind of extrapolate. I wonder how much of modern readers who say, oh, he was so prescient in his predictions, because he framed the house and let you decorate it, are we just sort of laying ourselves on top of it, or did he really do all that they're attributing to him? I don't know. But that's the sign certainly of a master at what he's doing. And his description was definitely, like I said, well done. And the tech he was envisioning, I mean, that wasn't, I don't know how common what he was doing was. From everything on the research, on the reviews and the literature that I found, everyone seemed to think that, or attribute the tech he was creating as groundbreaking, which is, doesn't surprise me with he graduated from Annapolis. Everyone who graduates from the federal academies has a engineering degree. Even history majors have a bachelor of science, not arts, but science in history, because of all the math they have to take. So, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that he envisioned the tech the way he did, but it's certainly groundbreaking, and that has stood the test of time. I mean, he used nuclear when, we probably have other options now that we would have known about. Some of his descriptions, I think, of like the psychology stuff, so the hypnosis and the use of that to make people calm before battle. I don't know how much of that would stand up to modern psychology. I know when they had the secret base that they did their refueling and they stopped at, it's the planet, and I can't remember what it was, where he did his OCS training. They mentioned some of the evolutionary and the botany and all that, and all the planetary evolution. I don't know if that science holds or not. I did know that it sounded interesting, but I don't know how well that would have stood the test of time. But I mean, he was definitely a thinker.
I'm not sure he was even trying to do hard sci-fi. I think he was partly telling a story and partly maybe describing his utopian future.
Well, I don't think he was trying to tell hard science fiction, but the details that you think are important that you or notice are based on your world experience. And so, I don't know, as an infantryman describing a scene, I might talk about the terrain, the plants, the smell, the wind. Somebody that's, an IT person might notice, oh my good, look at all those power lines. And, oh, by the way, that paint over there, that tells me they buried something. You know what I mean? Like, so his worldview is definitely shaped by his experience as an engineer.
Okay.
And that was all I was getting at. Anyway, you guys got anything else you want to add to the world building and description?
Tommy?
I think he kept it pretty general on, even when they go to pee, that a lot.
Not to urinate, but
Planet P. Sorry. Smart ass. And of course, every time I say that, I immediately remember the song from the 80s, or the band from the 80s called Planet P. I
wonder if that's connected.
Gee, I wonder. I thought that one of the reasons why we don't get too much description of the worlds themselves and those kinds of things, like you were talking about in the infantry, is these guys are always in their suit. They're either on the ship naked, practically, or they're in a suit on the planet. I mean, that's basically their life.
Their environment never changes. It looks different, but it never really changes.
Yeah, so basically what they're viewing through the porthole is all that matters. Everything else is just static.
I can definitely relate to that now that you mention it in that way. I know when we were in Iraq, because, everybody, had a different mission, but I escorted convoys. And so for me, I was always in the back of a gun truck driving around. So, for me, one MSR is pretty much the same as another. And half the time I couldn't tell you exactly where I was. So it wasn't like you were at, fill in the blank city. So, I mean, I could definitely see how that affects your worldview. Generally speaking, if you remembered something with enough detail like that, it's because something really, really bad happened.
Right. Exactly. It was something really unexpected that has stuck with you.
Right. So I hadn't considered that, the effect of the suit. But you're right. It was a closed system, so that would do it. Okay. So, we'll transition to the major themes, and then we'll just list them off and sort of hopefully wax poetic on it. But so one of the major themes attributed to this book was the rise of militarism in society writ large as a social commentary. So what was your take on that, Paul, as a theme for the book?
Oy, oy, oy. That's a huge can of worms because if you go back and you look, for some reason, Heinlein had a love affair with Pinochet.
Okay.
I don't know exactly, but he would never go to meet him. And that's I find that kind of disturbing, especially in the context of Starship Troopers. I have to go back and look at the dates. I meant to do that, but I hadn't done that. But the militarist side of it was also from one angle. In other words, Starship Troopers is all about Rico's experience and what he sees. We never get any kind of clue what the citizens actually think is going on, or what they see, or what they say, or anything else. We don't get any of that. All we do is we get the military side, even though we know that that's a very small side of the citizenry.
I think we get a little point of view from the father, but he seems to just think it's a waste of time, that it's really not important.
He wasn't a citizen.
Right.
He wasn't a citizen.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Right, so...
You see what I'm saying? So basically, we don't get an idea of how really, quote unquote, militaristic the society was, because we only get one point of view, and he's completely divorced from everything else is going on with the human race. This is the world he knows. This is his life. This is his universe. Now, the philosophy that is in here is nothing new, so to speak. Some of the ideas of how to implement it are new. But in fact, I would say that it's not militaristic so much as it is socialistic.
Yeah, when I did a quick Google search based on when you mentioned him and Pinochet from the Argentina, right? Revolution?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And so one of the things they talked about was how some of that is what converted him from being somewhat socialistic to more of a right-wing libertarian.
Right.
So that's definitely something to consider. So what about you, Chris? What was your take on the idea that militarism was a major theme?
I don't know. I kind of disagree with that summary that militarism was a theme because of the need for the military, because of the threats to the entire planet. I think that would be a natural response, especially I think the way to end wars between nations is to go ahead and have a good old alien invasion. Give us a common enemy. We wouldn't. I look forward to the day. Hopefully we survive. But I think then we would actually see world peace, because then we can turn all of our hatred and all of our weapons and everything towards a common enemy. We don't have to fight each other. But militarism, I think, was a result of the wars that needed to be fought. But I don't see the military as taking over and being totalitarian and being the jackbooted thugs that stomp people.
Yeah, I know that they did, he mentioned the one world government sort of thing, but he never really went that in depth into what that meant to him or to the universe that he was writing.
Or how it even worked.
Or how it even worked. Other than to vote, you needed to have served. But other than that, we really don't know much about it. So, I don't know. It's definitely interesting. I mean, I can see how the militarism as a theme could be a concern. People still worry about that in a modern world. But I don't know. My take on it was that, in a world as high tech as this, and as the modern world, if you want to extrapolate, where weapons are so advanced, designed to kill people from so far away, how do you defend against it and remain free of those militaristic traits? I mean, it's sort of, I think they sort of are symbiotic at a certain point, because you only are as free as you're willing to defend it. It's just, as my understanding of philosophy. And that, the critiques that I saw against the militarism in this story, and I'll try to find some of the literary articles so we can link them in the show notes. But my critique of that is basically, if we lived in utopia, all of that would be true, but we don't. So sometimes, you've got, what's the expression? You've got to break the eggs to make the omelets. I kind of see some of it was more utilitarian than militaristic. So But one of the other themes credited by academia, which, by the way, is why we invited Paul again, so he could say all the smart stuff while we grunted and Chris ate crowns.
And I'm out of crayons, mister.
You made a poor choice.
But one of the other themes that I was more on board with was sort of a coming of age story for the book. I know Heinlein was definitely known for his juveniles, and sort of even almost created a formula. I know J. Daniel Sawyer has his Everyday Novelist podcast where he even outlines some of what is the formula for the Heinlein juvenile. And then he wrote one, I think. What was it? Suave Rob, I think he said it was. But yeah, so
God, no.
No, I don't know. I know he wrote one. I remember him talking about it. But, they actually he created a genre of sort of the men's adventure fiction for kids.
Right.
So what was your take on that, Paul, as far as the how much of a coming of age story Starship Troopers was?
The character undergoes really so little change. He's an observer. He is pretty much an observer throughout the entire book. His how do we put this? His moral center or his personality center, whatever you want to call it, is so detached that he basically starts to believe when I first read the book, this is how I took it, that whoever he talks last to is the one that has has got the most sway over him.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Until he gets through boot camp. And then he starts to make his own assessments, but still it's all based on the fact that he finally found something he could grasp. And I think that's one of when he talks about how much he hated Mr. Dubois, and nobody paid attention to that class. They didn't have to pass it. He didn't understand why the guy was so hard on him all the time, all this other kind of stuff. And yet that was his favorite teacher. That's the teacher he keeps going back to and remembering. So it seems to me that his entire coming of age is coming to grips with the fact that he has completely reinvented himself. But the fact that he's still so detached from everybody and everything except for his unit, the idea, the concept of the unit, not even the people, but the concept of the unit, the concept of the organization. It just seemed to me like he became even more static than when he started.
Yeah, you saw some of that when he makes his first combat jump, with the unit that end up getting wiped, his first one. And you hear about, he mentions that they're walking around the ship and they've got these earrings with the skull and the crossbones and then I guess the more combat jumps they make, the more skulls or whatever they get.
More bones.
The more bones. And so, that's the expression, making your bones. But so the more you do that, and he's like really excited to get his own, and he seems really naive and childlike in that scene. And then he finally gets it, and they ship him to another unit, and they're like, yeah, we don't do that. And so, and he was right on board with whatever the newest thing was. It struck me that if he thought he earned it, he'd be like, well, I do, fools, so I'm going to wear it. You know what I mean? Like that was a perfect opportunity for him to show his individualism. He was with that unit. He earned it. But then as soon as the next guy says, nope, we don't do that, he's like, oh, okay.
I think it also, you can go, it was just a trinket to him. It didn't really mean anything. It was status among that crew, but outside of that crew, it didn't mean jack squat. And then he finally figured out that these people had been making dozens and dozens and dozens of jumps. And he ain't jack.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't see this as a coming of age at all. All I saw was him get really good at his job. That's all I saw. His morals stayed the same. He matured a little bit, but he really everything focused on his job. That's all I saw.
Yeah.
So I completely disagree with coming of age. I don't think it actually happened.
I think the literaries and the academia crowd were wrong on this one as well. I didn't really see any growth. Sorry, Paul, but
I am not an academia person. I'm not a literati either. I write monster books. Leave me alone.
I do believe Terry Mixon says you commit the crime of literature.
He has accused me of committing the crime of literature, as says Dan Sawyer. So yes, I do commit literature on occasion.
I do know Heinlein, and I think maybe the people writing these reviews, I wonder if they actually read the book, because I know Heinlein definitely wrote Juveniles. The Space Cadet, John Corbett, or I could be getting it wrong. I know the Space Cadet book series was definitely, you know, the juvenile coming of age story, but yeah, I didn't buy it for this one. And the last theme that I found on some of the academic writing was the moral decline of society was sort of a theme. What was your take on that one, Paul?
Again, it's so difficult to really grasp that because we saw almost none of the society. We saw people who had opinions about what it meant, but those are the only opinions we're given. We're never really given any kind of touchstone for it.
No neutral third party.
We never, because it was never discussed with anyone that had a different opinion. We don't know what was really going on there. And like I said, he was so detached from everything. He would be the last person on the planet to tell us that society is decadent, because he doesn't even know what the hell that is. He's fighting for it. He believes in it. But remember, he can't even spend his freaking money or vote until he's out of the military.
Yeah.
True. they do mention
so
that.
how could he possibly have any idea? And he didn't have any idea when he was in high school because he was so detached and living in a bubble. So I don't really see that as I don't see any kind of decline. I know they talked about it, but the bottom line is I didn't see it. I saw that as an opinion. I did not see it anywhere else.
Yeah.
No display.
I agree 100%.
I could see when they talk about it, you're right. There was no perspective. You just, for all we know, this is a rogue opinion among the military that isn't popular among the vast majority, because you definitely get the idea that the vast majority of people don't bother going through the service just to vote. Like, they don't see it as that big of a deal. Based purely on the scene with his father, where his dad's like, yeah, we don't need that to succeed in business. But I mean, I could see some of the concerns he brought up when he talked about the class with Dubois. But then the flip side of that is that I always wondered, that was my takeaway from those moral philosophy flashbacks, was, exactly how free are you, and how, if they're making you do the right thing against your will, is the society really any more virtuous than it was before? Is there virtue in being forced to do something, even if it's, quote, the right thing?
It's not being forced, though, because they're volunteers. They're free to resign at any time.
No,
and
the corporal punishment to enforce the will, the whippings, all of that was what created this society. Okay. When he talks about, like, the decline of the 21st century and the kids run amok and all of that, they mention that that they created this virtuous one world government basically through the force of the whip and public shaming. Some of the public shaming is just the cultural norms being enforced. But I mean, if they're doing the right thing because you're beating the snot out of them, is it really virtuous? Because they didn't make that free choice.
We'll make you virtuous by putting a gun to your head.
Right. That was my takeaway when they talked about morality. Is like,
well, here's
a little bit squishy for me.
Here's something I've learned, actually, working with some pretty messed up kids. If you can get a kid at first to do the right thing for the wrong reason, that you can actually train the kid to do that as a habit, to do the right thing for the right reason afterwards. If you just get them, it's like a heavy boulder. You get them moving in the right direction, they'll continue it, maybe with a little prodding once in a while, but usually no more than words after that. I don't know if he thought about that, but that's what I found.
I mean, yeah.
I think it does bring up, and of course, I haven't read enough of his biography to get a clue of this, but I wonder what he thought about the beats of the 50s, and maybe that's what he was talking about.
The beats?
Are the beatniks?
The Beat Generation.
The beatniks, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Ginsburg and folks like that.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Do you have anything else you want to add in there, Chris?
No, I didn't see a moral decline theme any more than any other generation thinks that the kids are rotten of their generation, yet somehow we're still here.
Yeah, the sky is always falling, Chicken Little.
That's right.
So, well, then let's not beat the dead horse. So, what was your overall thoughts on this, Paul?
Well, it's funny because I read this when I was, I think, 13. And I remember getting a whole bunch of shit from the jocks because the paperback had a bunch of bugs on the cover of it. He's like, "Oh man, he's reading a book about killing bugs, man." So I remember that incident specifically, but the book definitely took on a lot more meaning to me this time around because I was old enough and mature enough to analyze what Heinlein was saying about the politics, about the philosophy, et cetera, ad infinitum, and looking for those nuances. So seeing it again through older eyes was very interesting to me, and I'm really glad that y'all gave me an excuse to do that. It is I think, a wonderful example of old sci-fi that still stands up. And so I really recommend folks read it.
So the cover that you had when you read it the first time is the one with the giant bug and the humans look minuscule in comparison?
I think it was just a single human being and wearing a spacesuit with maybe 4 bugs on the cover in each of the corners.
I don't remember seeing that one when I did the research. The one I saw, the one that's most common now is they use the one from the movie poster to reference it back. And then I saw the one with him in the powered armor as they're putting the helmet on with the sort of space age piping behind him. But I didn't see the one similar to what you're describing. I definitely think that was
a long time ago.
I definitely think the evolution of the cover is definitely something worth looking at.
I never even thought about that, but yeah, you're right. How the cover has changed over the years, and you do the same thing with Fahrenheit 451. Really says something about the age in which it's published. These reprints are published.
Yeah,
right.
So I definitely thought it was thought that was interesting as I looked at all the different covers, and I made the mistake when I wrote my book review because it used the when I did it with the Goodreads with links to the Facebook account, and because the newer version has the cover from the movies, all the purists were like, "How dare you watch the movie? The book is sacrosanct." And some of them really, really lit into me. I'm like, dude, look, it's the book review. It's Goodreads. But anyway, it was definitely
the movie is a completely separate animal that, it's just almost no resemblance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the movie, don't get me wrong, but it definitely, other than the character names, there wasn't a whole lot of similarity. What about you, Chris? What was your overall take on the book?
I give it a 4 out of 5, maybe 4.5 out of 5. This is something I'm going to read again. I learned a lot from it just as an author of how to introduce information and how to make it flow and seem natural. That's the best part I got out of this book is how to do that.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know. I gave it a 3 out of 5. It wasn't bad. It was a classic novel that felt more like a academic treatise and a philosophical rambling than it really did a true novel, because the plot seemed only about expressing the opinions of the author in this. Maybe that's my modern reader sentiment about what I feel, makes a good story. I don't know. I know my expectations were definitely colored by having seen the movie first. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it's not something I was raving about either. I do know that I've hinted at a super secret project that I can't tell about because I've signed a non-disclosure until it publishes. But in that universe, there's a mech suit type deal, and I remember when I sent it to the editor, he's like, "You just read Heinlein, didn't you?" Because I had the bouncing around for the tactic. So I mean, it sort of has crossed the line from just a book to creeping into society, I think, of the genre specifically.
So tell us, JR, what email address should everybody send the hate mail to?
Chris at Chris
Nope.
Winder. I don't know. I didn't hate it, but it wasn't my all-time favorite for sure. I know I'm going to get the letters.
I can't wait.
I know.
You're entitled to your opinion, no matter how wrong it is.
That's right.
No, but I can definitely take your point, and I can see how you could form that opinion, and it's perfectly valid. It's perfectly valid.
So I grew up reading the science fiction of the 80s and 90s, which is definitely, I can tell, influenced Terry, because I love Terry Mixon's Empire of Bone series. So it's got that sort of space opera, large, expansive universe, and an infinite number of possibilities. Like, that's kind of what I look for in a story these days. So you can always, picture the world when the books close and you're done reading for the day. You can sort of picture the world still going. Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern. Did I pronounce her name right? I'm never sure on her last name.
I think so.
But like that kind of story is what's engaging to me. So this was different. I mean, like I said, I enjoyed it for what it was, but it was more like reading, I don't know, one of the classics that you're reading for your English class than necessarily something that was fun. I enjoyed reading The Taming of the Shrew in the Shakespeare novel, but I don't know that I would call it, my favorite reading I'd read outside of class.
Well, not everybody has a good taste. That's fine.
So, I know we're running at the hour mark, and that's where we try to keep these episodes. So, in conclusion, when you send your hate mail to Paul, not to JR, Paul, do you want to tell them where they can find you one more time? And again, it'll be in the show notes.
You can find me at shadowpublications.com for the free podcast, as well as essays and reviews. You can find me at patreon.com/Paul E. Cooley. I have an Amazon author page. I have a Facebook author page, etc. ad infinitum. You can email me at paul at shadowpublications.com.
Chris, if you're still talking to me after